Have you ever tried to water a dying flower, hoping it would bloom again, because you just couldn't let it go? You gave it sunlight, you whispered your hopes, you waited, and even quando it kept wilting, you blamed yourself. Maybe you didn't water it right. Maybe you didn't love it enough. Maybe the soil wasn't ready. And maybe, just maybe, you didn't want to admit that no matter what you did, it was never going to bloom again. That's what it feels like when you love someone who doesn't love you back in the way you need. Not necessarily because they're cruel, or absent, or even bad, but because something in that bond no longer fluoresces. And even a sim, you stay. You stay with your watering can full of hope, full of dreams, full of everything you still believe love can become. But each time you pour yourself into that silence, into that coldness, into that absence, you lose a little more daquilo que só você podia oferecer, your essence. It's not just what he does that hurts. It's what you've learned to suppress to keep him close. You've silenced your intuition. You've put your needs aside. You've apologized for being too much or too sensitive, when in truth, you were just being real. That pain you feel, it didn't start with him, and it won't end when he changes. Because this is not just a story about a man who pulls away. It's a story about a woman who forgot how to come closer to herself. Somewhere along the way, the desire to be chosen became stronger than the desire to be whole. And that's not weakness. That's a longing that was never met, a wound that grew in the silence of unmet needs. Louise Hay once said, "You've been criticizing yourself for years, and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." She wasn't just talking about mirrors or mantras. She was talking about that sacred moment when you stop punishing yourself for someone else's inability to see you. Because what if the problem isn't him? What if the true ache is in the parts of you that you abandon each time you try to hold on to someone who doesn't know how to hold you? What if the pain is not rejection, but self-neglect? What if his absence is just a mirror reflecting the places inside you that feel unworthy of love unless they're being chased, fixed, needed? There's a hunger, isn't there? Not just to be loved, but to be deeply seen, to be valued without having to earn it, to be chosen without shrinking. And it hurts because maybe you thought if you gave more, loved harder, waited longer, something would shift. But instead of him changing, you did. You became quieter, smaller, less you. And that's why this isn't just about him. This is about you. About the sacred waters you keep giving to soil that no longer responds. About the exhaustion of nurturing something that keeps asking for more, but never gives back. Lise Bourbeau once wrote, "Your body and relationships reveal the wounds you still refuse to acknowledge." Maybe your relationship with him is not your biggest problem. Maybe it's the echo of an older grief, of all the times you weren't chosen, or worse, when you didn't choose yourself. But love shouldn't ask you to disappear. Real love, sacred, conscious, reciprocal, doesn't require that you go missing in the process. It doesn't live in the drought. It doesn't grow in self-sacrifice. It doesn't ask you to earn what should be freely given. And you, my dear, were not born to beg for crumbs of affection. You were born to remember the garden inside of you, the one that blooms when you water yourself first. Let's go deeper into that now, because the truth is, the real problem was never him. The real pain isn't his distance. It's your emotional drought. It starts subtly. You notice he pulls away, and you ache. You feel the silence stretch between you, and your mind tries to fill it with explanations, with stories, with hope. But the ache? Oh, the ache. It doesn't come only from his absence. It comes from all the times you silenced your own needs just to keep him near. All the moments you didn't speak your truth because you feared it would push him further. All the times you said you were okay when you were crumbling inside. You stayed close to him, but drifted miles away from yourself. That kind of emptiness doesn't happen overnight. It builds, slowly, quietly, in the name of peace, in the name of love, in the hope that if you just give a little more, adapt a little further, suppress a little longer, he'll finally see you. He'll finally return. But love that costs your voice, your dignity, your presence, that's not love. That's erosion. And the part that hurts the most isn't even him walking away. It's you, watching yourself disappear in the process. Louise Hay spoke gently to that place when she said, "I lovingly release the past. They do not define me anymore." That they can be anyone. A father who never listened, a lover who withdrew, a friend who didn't show up. But in truth, what defines you isn't what they did. It's what you choose now. And sometimes, choosing yourself starts with acknowledging just how deep the drought has gone, how dry your soul has become from pouring and pouring into places that never poured back. This isn't about blaming you. This is about seeing you, really seeing the woman who gave her all and still felt like not enough. Seeing the moments you smiled when your heart was heavy, the nights you waited for a message that never came, the hours spent rereading old texts, hoping to decode his silence. That's not weakness. That's love, misdirected. That's hope, misplaced. That's a heart that tried so hard to matter, it forgot it already did. So when he distances himself and you feel that familiar twist in your stomach, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, not why he pulled away, but when you last stayed close to you. Ask where the drought began. Ask what you stopped feeling, saying, needing, just to keep something alive that maybe was already gone. The wound isn't that he left. The wound is all the times you left yourself so he wouldn't. The silent agreement. You teach him how to treat you by what you tolerate. Sometimes it's not what he says that shapes the relationship. It's what you let slide. The apology you never received, but accepted anyway. The promise he broke again, and again, and again. The emotional absence that became your new normal. And slowly, without realizing it, you entered an unspoken contract. One where your silence became permission, and your forgiveness became routine. No one tells us this, but every time we ignore our own pain to keep the peace, we reinforce the cycle. We think we're being patient. We tell ourselves it's just a phase. We convince our hearts that love requires sacrifice. But there's a difference between compassion and self-abandonment. And too often, in the name of love, women abandon themselves. You didn't teach him with your words. You taught him with your endurance. And not because you're weak, but because you were trying to be strong. Strong enough to hold what was falling apart. Strong enough to stay when everything in you was breaking. Strong enough to love him back to life. But strength without boundaries isn't strength. It's surrender. Not the sacred kind, but the kind that wears you down until you no longer recognize the woman in the mirror. Louise Hay didn't say, "Hold your pain until he understands it." She said, "I lovingly release the past. They do not define me anymore." And in that release, there is a quiet revolution. A moment where you remember, you are not a project. You are not a lesson for someone else to learn. You are a woman, whole, worthy, deserving of reciprocity, not just resilience. The prison isn't his behavior. It's what you tell yourself about your need to stay. It's the lie that says love means staying no matter what. But real love, conscious love, doesn't require you to keep accepting pain as proof of devotion. Real love grows where there's honesty, mutuality, respect. And if he doesn't offer that, it doesn't mean you failed. It means you're being asked to rise. Because every time you let something slide that hurts you, every time you minimize your need to keep someone close, you teach him something. And not just him. You teach yourself too. You teach your soul that your needs don't matter, that your feelings are too much, that you asking for more is unreasonable. But you're not asking for too much. You're asking for what's sacred. And the moment you stop tolerating less is the moment your spirit begins to breathe again. What if your conflict with him is just a reflection of the conflict within you? There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop asking why he's distant and begin to wonder, what am I really aching for? Because sometimes, the battle outside is just a mirror of the war inside. His indifference, his avoidance, his inability to connect, they're not just his. They echo something deeper, something older, something yours. Maybe it's not the first time you felt this way. Maybe long before him, there were other silences that shaped you. A childhood where your needs felt too heavy. A love that never saw you fully. A life where you learned that being needed was safer than being known. And so you adapted. You became the giver, the fixer, the woman who holds it all. Not because you were whole, but because you were afraid of breaking. And now, here you are again, facing a man who won't meet you where you are. But what if it's not really about him? What if the pain he triggers is simply pointing to the wound you've carried for years? A wound that says, if I'm just enough, they'll stay. A wound that fears being abandoned. A wound that confuses love with struggle. When Louise Hay said, "Heal the wound," and the trigger disappears, she was inviting us to look inward, not outward. Because the real question isn't why is he like this? It's what inside me keeps choosing someone who can't meet me. And that question, it doesn't come with blame. It comes with liberation. The truth is, the people we attract often reflect the relationship we have with ourselves. If we struggle to set boundaries, we draw in those who cross them. If we fear being alone, we cling to those who make us feel lonelier. If we're disconnected from our own worth, we seek validation in those least equipped to give it, not because we're broken, but because our soul is trying, desperately, to get our attention. It whispers through every heartbreak, every disappointment, every unanswered message. "Look here," it says. "This ache is sacred. Don't numb it. Don't blame him for it. Feel it. And ask, what part of me is still waiting to be chosen by me?" Because when you stop trying to fix him, you start to see yourself. And that's where the real healing begins. How love turns into self-betrayal without you noticing. In the beginning, it felt like love. You opened your heart, softened your voice, and believed in the connection. You offered patience. You gave benefit of the doubt. You stretched yourself thin, thinking that maybe, just maybe, love would be enough to hold you both. But somewhere between waiting for him to change and trying to hold it all together, something shifted. You stopped recognizing yourself. The things that once made you feel radiant, your laughter, your intuition, your boundaries, began to fade. Not because you wanted to lose them, but because you thought letting them go would make him stay. You started walking on eggshells. You second-guessed your emotions. You smiled when your soul was tired. And without even realizing it, love, real, raw, sacred love, turned into something else. Self-betrayal. That kind of betrayal isn't loud. It's not cruel. It doesn't shout or slam doors. It whispers. It tiptoes. It shows up in the way you dismiss your own discomfort to avoid conflict. In the way you say it's fine when it's not. In the way you lower your expectations just so you won't be disappointed again. And it hurts. Not because he's silent or distant or emotionally unavailable. It hurts because you've started believing that his lack of effort means you're not enough. That if you just do more, give more, shrink more, he'll love you better. But love that asks you to disappear isn't love. It's survival. And you were not meant to survive love. You were meant to live it. Louise Hay reminded us, "I am willing to release the need to be unworthy." That's not just an affirmation. It's a revelation. Because sometimes we cling to unworthy love not because we believe it's right, but because we haven't yet believed we deserve better. We betray ourselves quietly, hoping someone else will save us loudly. But no one can rescue the parts of you that you've silenced. No one can speak the truth you've buried. No one can choose you the way you can. And the moment you realize that, the moment you pause and feel the ache of all you've abandoned, you begin to return, slowly, tenderly, fully. Because real love never asks for your absence. It calls you home. And you, my love, are long overdue for your own return. The woman who always asked, "What's wrong with me?" until she stopped. She used to ask herself that question almost every day. What's wrong with me? Not out loud, not in front of anyone, but deep inside, in those quiet hours when the silence from him echoed louder than words. She would replay their conversations, scan through their messages, relive the moments he pulled away. And every time he changed without warning, every time he went cold without reason, she turned the blame inward. Maybe if I were more patient, maybe if I didn't overthink, maybe if I didn't need so much. She molded herself into what she thought he needed. Softer here, quieter there, always shrinking just a bit more, until she could barely hear her own voice. He never asked her to do that. He didn't need to, because she was already doing what so many women are conditioned to do. Take responsibility for someone else's inability to love. And in doing so, she forgot the most important relationship of all, the one with herself. This isn't about demonizing him. This is about humanizing her. A woman who just wanted to be loved. A woman who believed that if she could just be a little less messy, a little more agreeable, a little less herself, maybe he'd stay. Maybe he'd change. Maybe she'd finally be enough. But one day, something shifted. Not because he woke up. Not because he apologized. Not because he changed, but because she did. She sat with her ache. She listened to the voice she had silenced. She stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What have I abandoned in myself just to be loved?" And the answers came slowly, in tears, in solitude, in moments of clarity that felt like coming up for air after years underwater. She realized it was never about being too much or not enough. It was about being unseen, even by herself. She didn't leave him out of anger. She left him out of self-recognition. She stopped waiting for him to see her, and started seeing herself. The end of that relationship wasn't a failure. It was a return, to truth, to dignity, to her own sacred reflection. And perhaps that's the quiet revolution so many women need. Not a dramatic ending, not a declaration of war, but a soft, powerful shift from questioning their worth to reclaiming it. The need to be chosen that makes you abandon yourself. There's a moment many women don't speak about, not because it's rare, but because it feels too vulnerable to name. It's the moment you realize you've built your whole sense of worth around being chosen, not just by a partner, but by anyone, in any space, who might finally make you feel like enough. You don't plan for it. It doesn't come from vanity. It comes from an ache, a childhood wound, a pattern of emotional scarcity, a life spent trying to be good enough to deserve presence. So when someone begins to pull away, that wound screams louder than reason, and without noticing, you begin to shift. You soften your truths. You laugh at things that don't feel right. You agree when your heart protests, because you're no longer choosing yourself. You're performing, hoping they will. But here's the deeper grief. Every time you silence yourself to be picked, you abandon the most sacred voice you have, your own. And after a while, that inner silence becomes unbearable. You wake up unsure of who you are. You look in the mirror and see someone who's always waiting to be seen, always hoping to be heard by someone else. It's not that you don't have a voice. It's that you've stopped trusting it. And when you don't listen to yourself, when you ignore your intuition, your truth, your needs, you begin to believe that no one else will either. Because how can the world know you if you've stopped knowing yourself? This isn't about shame. It's about returning. About remembering that your need to be chosen is not wrong, but it becomes harmful when it's rooted in forgetting your own sacredness. You were never meant to be picked like a product on a shelf. You were meant to be met, to be mirrored, to be seen by someone who recognizes you because you've already recognized yourself. That kind of recognition doesn't come from begging for attention. It comes from presence, from quiet courage, from standing so deeply in your truth that it becomes impossible to abandon again. And it starts when you stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth and begin listening, really listening, to the woman within who has waited long enough to be heard. Because if you don't choose you, no one else truly can. The energy of lack. Why you keep repeating the same emotional cycles. It's strange how familiar pain can become. You tell yourself it will be different this time. A new face, a different story, another chance to finally be chosen the way your heart has longed for. But after a while, the cycle returns. The same emptiness, the same chase, the same aching hope that maybe this one will stay. And it's not because you don't want love. It's because the energy you carry, the vibration of lack, of longing, of waiting, keeps attracting what you already know. Not because the universe is cruel, but because it is honest. It reflects back to you not what you desire, but what you believe. And when you walk through life feeling incomplete, every relationship becomes an attempt to fill the void. But the truth is, no one can love you out of your own absence. No one can heal the gap between who you are and who you've convinced yourself you need to be in order to deserve affection. You don't need more validation. You need restoration. You need to come back to the fullness of who you are before you believed love had to be earned through pain. Louise Hay offered a beautiful reminder when she said, "I am open and receptive to all the good and abundance in the universe." That abundance isn't just financial. It's emotional, spiritual, relational. But to receive it, you must first believe you are worthy of it. And worthiness cannot coexist with chronic self-neglect. The cycle only repeats when your heart still believes that love is a prize for your endurance, rather than a birthright of your being. When you operate from lack, you magnetize relationships that echo your scarcity. They take, they drain, they leave you wondering why you're still so empty, when you gave so much. But here's the quiet miracle. The moment you shift your inner frequency from not enough to already whole, everything around you begins to change. The people who only loved your wounds stop feeling like home. The silence you used to dread becomes sacred. The waiting turns into choosing, and the love you once begged for begins to bloom inside you, on its own. Because when you are full of yourself, not in ego, but in essence, no one else has the power to empty you again. Emotional boundaries. Not everything he says or does deserves a reaction. There is a sacred kind of power that arises the moment you realize, not everything deserves your response. Not every silence requires your explanation. Not every cold shoulder needs your warmth. And not every emotional storm is yours to calm. For so long you may have carried the weight of his moods, the silence that followed every argument, the unpredictability of his affection, the subtle shifts in his voice that made you question your worth. You became the emotional barometer for the relationship, adjusting yourself to keep the peace, sacrificing your clarity to avoid the sting of confrontation. But here's the truth. Some silences are not about you. Some absences are not a reflection of your value. Some storms belong to him alone. And when you internalize every rupture as your responsibility, you begin to lose the boundary between what is yours and what is not. Setting emotional boundaries is not about building walls. It's about remembering where you end and another begins. It's about understanding that his lack of presence does not mean you're unlovable. His confusion is not your cue to perform. His chaos is not your calling to fix. Louise Hay's wisdom echoes here. I do not have to justify myself to anyone. That includes the moments when your silence is your protection. That includes the times you choose stillness over proving your point. That includes the sacred choice to not react, to let him carry his own emotional consequences without stepping in to rescue him from himself. Because love without boundaries is not love. It's codependency. It's fear in disguise. It's you, once again, putting yourself aside in the hope that he'll finally understand. But if understanding must be begged for, it's not true understanding. And if connection only comes through crisis, it's not real intimacy. You are not here to absorb everything he cannot express. You are not here to translate his absence into love. You are here to feel safe in your own skin, to choose what nourishes your spirit, to protect your energy, even from those you care about deeply. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to not react, to let the silence be his, to let the discomfort be his, to let the journey back to himself be his responsibility, not yours, because your peace is sacred, and it's not up for negotiation. From fixing him to finding you, the shift that ends the drama. There comes a moment when the exhaustion becomes louder than the desire, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've finally started listening to yourself. The endless analyzing of his words, the constant decoding of his moods, the quiet hope that if you just love him better, deeper, more purely, he'll change. It all begins to feel like too much, because it is. You were not meant to be someone's emotional caretaker. You were not born to play therapist in the name of love. You are not here to carry another's healing on your back while yours goes untouched. The truth that slowly, tenderly begins to rise is this. Fixing him is not your job. Finding you, that's where your power has always been. For so long, the drama felt like connection. The highs and lows, the cycles of withdrawal and return, the ache of waiting followed by brief moments of hope. But that wasn't love. That was survival. That was your nervous system trying to make sense of a bond that was more familiar than fulfilling. And the drama wasn't proof of passion. It was the echo of old wounds reenacted over and over. Louise Hay didn't say, heal him. She said, I am in the process of positive change. That process starts when you reclaim your own emotional life, when you stop measuring your worth through his behavior, when you decide that peace is more valuable than potential, that stability is more nourishing than intensity, that being whole is more sacred than being needed. You don't need to prove your love by enduring pain. You don't need to earn affection through sacrifice. You don't need to keep showing up for someone who doesn't even know how to show up for himself. What you need is space, clarity, truth, and above all, the courage to return to yourself, because you are not the woman who begs. You are not the woman who waits for crumbs. You are not the woman who trades her voice for someone else's comfort. You are the woman who remembers, who rises, who, in the silence after all the noise, finally hears the most important voice of all, her own. And when you find her, when you meet yourself again beneath all the layers of fixing and fighting and fearing, the drama ends. Not because he changed, but because you did. You didn't have a problem with him. You had forgotten your own power. It's a strange realization, isn't it? After all the tears, the questions, the late-night overthinking, you begin to see that the problem was never just about him. It was about the places inside you that you abandoned while trying to hold on to someone else. The conflict with him was real, yes, but the deeper ache, the one that lingered long after he left the room, was yours. And that ache wasn't a flaw. It was a signal, a call back to yourself. Because somewhere along the way, in your beautiful longing to be loved, you stopped asking if that love was nourishing you or draining you. You stopped hearing your own voice. You stopped remembering your own strength. Louise Hay once said, I am in the process of positive change. That change doesn't begin with fixing him. It begins when you remember what you used to know before the pain took over, that you are worthy, that you are allowed to take up space, that your emotions matter, that your needs are not too much, that your presence is sacred, even when no one else acknowledges it. Lise Bourbeau added another layer of truth. The more you try to change the other, the less you listen to your own wounds. And isn't that what we've all done, in some form? Tried to make someone stay, just so we wouldn't have to sit with the ache of our own loneliness. Tried to be enough for someone else, because being enough for ourselves felt too unfamiliar, too tender, too scary. But the healing doesn't come through understanding him. It comes through listening to you, to that part of you that's been whispering all along, this isn't who you really are, the one who remembers your light, your depth, your voice. There's a symbol that lives in so many of our stories, the echo. That moment when you cry out and the only thing that comes back is your own voice. You were waiting for him to answer. You were hoping he'd hear. But all you heard was your own pain returning, again and again. And yet, in that silence, something shifts. You begin to hear something else. Not the echo of pain, but the emergence of presence. Your presence, your knowing, your truth. Maybe what you called a problem with him was really a reminder from the universe, from your soul, from the deepest parts of you, that you hadn't chosen yourself yet, that you were still waiting for someone else to name your worth. And now, you don't have to wait anymore. The most powerful message doesn't come from him. It comes from you, from the moment you decide to stay, with yourself, for yourself, as yourself. So if these words resonated with your heart, I invite you to become part of this circle of healing and remembrance. Subscribe, and let's continue walking this path together, with truth, with tenderness, and with deep spiritual courage. And if your soul feels ready for the next step, the next layer, the next truth, there's another message waiting for you right here on the screen, a continuation of this journey. Click it and meet the next part of yourself.